So we're class 129, the Golden Doves. It's Arif Shabbat. I have a few minutes, and I have not been given too many classes lately. I do want to take you to page 72. We're studying Saadia Gaon's theory of language, which is very similar to the theory of language proposed by the structuralist, and we read that last time. Now we are going to be dealing with the Arabic term ism. Ism is an Arabic term that my father highlights in his personal copy of the Moneda Bukhim. I took a look at it, and he circles that word because it's a significant word. So there are certain key terms in the Moneda Bukhim that in order to understand the Moneda, you have to be aware of what those key terms mean. So let's read. One, at bottom of page 72. One must distinguish between the ism, name, the linguistic sign which includes the sharah, and the ma'na that the sign indicates. That's interesting. So ism, I would say it's similar to the idea of signifier, right? So the signifier is the word that's used to describe the object or the thing. So ism is very similar to signifier, right? And therefore, my father associates ism as something that includes your sharah, because the signifier points out at the very simple level to the sharah, to the lexical meaning. So the word, the signifier cup signifies the cup, right? That's a lexical meaning of cup. So it's just sharah, right? So one must distinguish between the ism, name, the linguistic sign, and ma'na. So you see this difference between ism and ma'na, because all ism does is it's just a signifier, the bare, let's call it the bare signifier, and nothing else. And then there's a ma'na because the signifiers put together, you remember we said that they combine and then they point out to something else. I'm going to go now to the footnotes because I think there were some important footnotes here. So I'm going now to footnote 30, and he just has a reference here to the Moneda Bukhim. These are important references which I took a look at, but it's beyond the scope of this particular series of classes. I mean, the Moneda Bukhim is incredible, so I'm not going to get into that now. Okay, even in one language, the same ism can stand for more than one ma'ana. So you have one language, and the same. So I'll give you. So this is from the Moneda Bukhim, and so here's an example. So the word shaked. So the shaked is the ism, it's the signifier. That one signifier can refer to the makel shaked, right? Makel shaked means an almond branch, right? In modern Hebrew they say shkedia. It's shekedia, right? Okay, that's modern Hebrew. So shaked, shekedia. So an almond tree branch, a branch of an almond tree. That's makel shaked. That's the ism is the word shaked. But then it's also be shoked. I will do this, persistence. So you see how one ism, one word or one signifier can point out to two manas, completely different manas, right? And the same mana could require more than one ism. Let's go to footnote 32. And the same ma'ana, and sometimes you need two words, as for example I said the words es hagim is two isms to point out to the idea of an organic system of knowledge, which is the Torah, of course, right, which brings life. So some ma'ana require more than one ism, and there are some ism totally devoid of ma'ana. I'm trying to remember, what was the example of an ism devoid of ma'ana? Give me a moment. I think this was in chapter 60 of the Moreh, right? So chapter 60 of the Moreh in Helek Aleph. So you have part 1, chapter 60, right? And that's when you're talking about God. Because the words you use to point out to God, what do they really mean? Right? So that's deep stuff. Yeah? So again, I'm gonna read that sentence again. And there are some ism totally devoid of ma'ana. Conversely, there is ma'ana too subtle to be indicated in common language, which is the major cause of error. So, let me just get back to Moneh Nebuchim, Chelik Shishin. Right. So here, I want to be a little more precise. In chapter 60, he was talking about the idea of terms used to describe God in a negative sense, right? So when we say Ha'el Gadol, we don't really mean that he's big, because big is a spatial concept. God doesn't exist in space. But we mean to say he's not small. So you see how the ism there, the word Gadol, it doesn't really refer to a specific mana. We know he's not Katan, right? Or Ha'el Gadol, Hagibor, right? So Gibor means you're physical, and you have physical strength, but physical strength is usually something physical that produces some sort of physical strength. But God is not physical, of course. So you see, so that's the negative use of the terms in those cases. So that's what he means by devoid of. I wanted to be more precise, because I don't think I explained it properly 5 minutes ago. So that's that. And there are some isim totally devoid of mana. So that's an example. Conversely, there is ma'ana too subtle to be indicated in common language, which is a common cause of error. Okay, then I believe here he's talking about the name of God. Give me a moment. Perek Nun Zayin, Perek Aleph, Perek Aleph, Perek Nun Zayin, and I will open the book. בתארים יותר עמוק. ידוע כמציאות הוא מקרה קרה לו נמצא. So now, what did we say here? We said that there is mana too subtle to be indicated in common language. Right. So now we're speaking about God, right? So before we spoke about negative theology. Okay, so put that on the side, or negative terminology. But then sometimes you're speaking about the essence of God. And for example, you say God is Masui. God exists. You don't mean that in a negative sense exactly, but what do you mean by God exists? So there's a certain concept of existence in our mind, and I say, oh, I exist. Well, God's existence is not my existence, right? My existence depends on other things. God's existence depends on nothing else. So the point being that the existence of God, we use that word ism, but common language can't really be used to understand this esoteric concept of God's existence, right? Conversely, so although language can convey ma'ana is not, so again, conversely, there is ma'ana too subtle to be indicated in common language. It's the major cause of error. So why is that a cause of error? Because when you say God exists, oh, I exist, God exists, I understand that, yeah, that makes sense. No, you don't understand that, right? Or maybe you do. If you study the Moren, you understand something about that, let's say. Although language can convey ma'ana is not totally reducible to language. So it's true that language points out to ma'ana, but the ma'ana itself is not reducible to language. I mean, these are deep ideas, and many of the ideas are beyond normal, conventional thinking. All language can do is convey conventional thoughts. That's what language is by definition. Language are conventional terms used to indicate the conventional things, right? If it's not conventional, then it's not language, right? So all language can do is convey the conventional by definition, right? So the ma'ana is not conventional. Esoterics, Sodot HaTorah, Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkava, right? Sitre Torah, right? So language only conveys generalities, right? That's the idea of generalities because it's spoken by a public, right? All right. Accordingly, there is a mana residue transcending the linguistic sign. So sometimes when we use a linguistic sign, there is going to be a residue in the sense that the linguistic sign doesn't equal what it's pointing out towards. In the case of esoteric, non-conventional ideas, what is the merkava of the Hezkel. Oh, I know what a Merkava is. A Merkava is a chariot, right? It's something used to transport from point A to point B. All right, but what is the Merkava? So obviously there's going to be a residue between the idea of Merkava, right? The chariot and God's chariot, right? What is that chariot? And it's not really a chariot because it's Ma'aseh Merkava. It's that which is being done by the chariot. What is that? Right? Since we are unable to find an ism, accordingly, that's a residue. You see the residue transcending the linguistic sign? I'm pretty, Jack Derrida on grammatology, he touches upon some of these topics within the context of language. He understands the limitations of language and he discusses those limitations. Some very compelling passages there on grammatology. All right, continuing. The object of metaphor is to give linguistic expression to this type of mana. Now you know we need meshalim, right? Lehavin mashalum lisa divrei hachamim v'chidotam. Now you understand why we need meshalim. Why do the hachamim need to speak in meshalim? Because the hachamim understood what Jack Derrida discovered, which is the limitation of language. So what do? So the answer is you have to use metaphor, and use the metaphor to point out to something, right? So that's all you can do, right? To communicate an idea, because we use language to communicate. So in this case, we're going to have to use mishalim to communicate that which language on its own can't communicate. So we formulate the words in terms of a mashal, and hopefully that will assist in communicating that rather esoteric topic. All right. Until the next class.